question as to how to relate to the fanatic. Since the fanatic dehumanizes himself and his other, we may treat him as less than human as well. That, of course, conjures up a problem. Do we really want to dehumanize ourselves in dealing with those who dehumanize themselves and us? Is that the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth reaction that you would find desirable? Here, perhaps our best advice is to be taken from the popular saying that you should not argue with a stupid person, since he'll bring you down to his level first and then beat you with experience there. So don't argue with a fanatic, because he'll bring you down to his level and beat you with fanaticism. The better way to react is not through face-to-face argument, in many ways I would say, but through institutions that have been shaped in the light of basic requirement of empathetic involvement. Legal and political institutions in sufficiently decent state have been informed by that requirement, because this requirement, I would argue, for instance, lays at the base of granting people equal rights, giving them due process, etc. And they enable anyone who faces them to answer questions about their, in this case, presumed fanaticism with good or not so good reasons. Good examples, of course, are the trials against war criminals in Nuremberg, Israel, and many other places in the world, and on a different issue and scale, trials against Islamist terrorists today. Someone was speaking about the murder of Theo van Gogh, which I think was a clear example of fanaticism. And the man actually got a trial, of course, in which he was able to defend himself in a way. Sometimes, of course, we try to prevent fanaticism much earlier through schooling, etc., which nowadays is an issue in social integration. There too, I'd say, the first step should be taken from an empiric involvement that is directed at making comparisons, offering alternatives, making people see different sides to stories, etc., opening them up to the most basic neediness of human beings. And then sometimes there is war against fanatics, something that we are quite familiar with nowadays. Or war against those who are called fanatics and maybe even aren't fanatics. Think Middle East, think Iraq, think Afghanistan. Here reasoning with fanaticism stops and turns into a fight. And I don't think that fight can always be avoided. But here too there is a difference between a justified war and one that is not. I cannot decide here what makes a war against fanaticism justified, but I do suspect that apart from the quality of its exact goals, that question would have to be answered in terms of emphatic involvement, recognition of the faith of those affected by the war. Taking such involvement seriously does not in any way imply that there cannot be a hard answer to fanaticism, but it does imply that those who are fighting fanaticism are themselves bound by a requirement of a minimal emphatic involvement, even with their enemies, who are, after all, human beings. Fighting fanaticism is not easy, therefore, and in part it will always also be a struggle to fight the inner fanatic. I'm sure that is true. That was a claim that Lars made earlier. So that was it for now.